Balake. Where is Balake at?
My name's Blake.
Do you want to go to war, Balake? I'm for real. Aaron.
Aaron is right here, everyone. Good morning if you're in the U.S. and to everyone else, good afternoon or good evening, I guess. We're going to have a little bit of fun with this post. This video is going to highlight a blog post that Mike Rinder put up yesterday about David Miscavige, breaking down a recent publication Scientology put out, or a recent update to one of their websites, spinning this fantastic tale about David Miscavige and his history with L. Ron Hubbard, and how L. Ron Hubbard handpicked David Miscavige for this and that. And it's so full of lies. And Mike Rinder breaks it down, each one of these claims, and gives the true information that I wanted to highlight this, especially given since David Miscavige is probably the #1 fan of SPTV at this point. He's certainly one of the biggest advertisers on SPTV. I think between David Miscavige, aka Scientology, Tom Cruise, and the Mission Impossible movie, and Grant Cardone, these Scientologists are probably among the 3 biggest advertisers on this channel, which is pretty ironic. Actually, for you guys in the live chat or the comment section for the replay crew, if you see ads pop up on my video, can you just comment what the ad was for? I'm really curious to know how many of the ads are actually Scientology ads, or Tom Cruise Mission Impossible ads, or Grant Cardone ads, or anything else associated with Scientology. There's another Scientology company that advertises all over on social media. I think it's Natural Vitality. Is that what it is? It's like a supplements company. I think that's what it is. Anyway, I'm really curious to know. Let's break this down. It's not only David Miscavige's history that Scientology lies about. It's actually L. Ron Hubbard's history as well, which should come as no surprise. Actually, let me switch the view here. For you Scientologists out there, do you, under the radar guys who secretly watch the channel, do you remember back in the day when Scientology was talking about the upcoming L. Ron Hubbard biography, and how Dan Sherman, who spoke at tons of international events over the last 20 to 25 years, he passed away a few years ago, but he was always introduced as L. Ron Hubbard's biographer. But guess what never came out? L. Ron Hubbard's biography. The reason it never came out is because almost everything L. Ron Hubbard claimed about his history that a Scientologist would expect to be in such a biography was provably false by public records. My understanding is that this is actually what got Jerry Armstrong in trouble back in the day. Jerry Armstrong was a guy who was supposed to be L. Ron Hubbard's biographer way before Dan Sherman. And in the process of trying to do that biography, he came to the shocking realization that Scientology had lied about so many of the things about L. Ron Hubbard's history. And Jerry Armstrong said, hey, look, we have to fix this. We have to, Jerry Armstrong's position was that L. Ron Hubbard's history was, I guess, good enough that they should just revert back to the truth and stick with the truth. And it would be really harmful to keep running with the lies. And, once Miscavige, got wind of this, they got rid of Jerry Armstrong. So in comes Dan Sherman. Now, Dan Sherman, during this whole time that they were calling him the L. Ron Hubbard biographer, every now and then, once a year or so, or even more often, Scientology would release a new magazine in a series of magazines called the Ron Mags. And it was like, it would break down an aspect of L. Ron Hubbard's life. Ron the adventurer, Ron the explorer, Ron the photographer, Ron the filmmaker, Ron the horticulturalist, or whatever the hell it was. Scientology will now claim that those collection of Ron Mags is L. Ron Hubbard's biography. But it's not, guys, because you people who were around back then know very well that even as the Ron Mags were being released, Scientology was still saying that L. Ron Hubbard's biography was coming out. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out because it's one of these things that Scientologists don't give enough thought to. But if they take a moment to think about it and you start connecting these dots, so much of L. Ron Hubbard's history was fabricated and lied about. That is why the official L. Ron Hubbard biography never came out. Okay, so let's turn our attention to David Miscavige, the world's shortest cult leader. I believe he's in the Guinness Book of World Records as such. You can fact check that. Let's see. Mike Rinder says, David Miscavige was not anointed by L. Ron Hubbard. Now, I'm sorry, I can't help it, but want to talk too much right now. Any Scientologist is going to go, well, of course, Mike Rinder's saying that. He's just a bitter, defrocked apostate who's angry that Scientology kicked him out, and he'll say anything to lie about to lie about David Miscavige. And I just want to remind everybody, Mike Rinder has known David Miscavige since they were teenagers. Mike Rinder was already in the Sea Org when David Miscavige showed up. Mike Rinder and probably about 30 or 40 other people who are still around know the exact history of David Miscavige and just how little interaction David Miscavige actually had with L. Ron Hubbard compared to what's represented. All right, enough talking. Let's get to it. L. Ron Hubbard's trusted friend, perpetuating and preserving the legacy of the founder of Scientology. This is, I've never seen this glamour shot before, so this must be a relatively new one that Scientology has rolled out. Mike says, it is always amusing to read Scientology's hagiographic. I had to look up that word, guys. It's a biography of a religious leader. And I hope I'm pronouncing it right. To read Scientology's hagiographic musings about their fearless leader, Captain Miscavige. He has a website dedicated to him, and the same content is repeated in the special section devoted to the chairman of the board on the Scientology website. Nobody fact checks the claims made about him. Scientology operates on the principle of putting out so much garbage and lies that nobody can keep up with all the falsehoods. So they eventually become true. Here are a few glaring examples, taking the statements right from their website. Quote, barely a year after entering the Sea Organization, the Religious Order of Scientology, at the age of 16, he was among a handful of people selected to work directly with L. Ron Hubbard. Recognizing the 17-year-old's abilities, Mr. Hubbard appointed David Miscavige director of photography for the original Scientology training films. Mike says they forgot to mention that soon after, Hubbard removed David Miscavige from this position for being incompetent. The next claim that Scientology makes about David Miscavige. Soon after, at Mr. Hubbard's request, Mr. Miscavige served as action chief, the senior executive supervising projects involving Scientology churches around the world. By age 18, David Miscavige had become the individual L. Ron Hubbard called upon to carry out his most important assignments. No executive in the church's history ever interacted more with L. Ron Hubbard than Mr. Miscavige. They were in constant communication. Well, it's almost like they were beloved pen pals. Mike says this is a ridiculous assertion. Annie Broker had worked with Hubbard for years on the Apollo and then in Clearwater before Miscavige even joined the Sea Org. So too many other messengers. By the way, guys, one such messenger that Mike is referring to is Janice Gillum Grady, whose stories from back then, working with L. Ron Hubbard, et cetera, you can hear on the YouTube channel, Our Scientology Stories Peeling the Onion. You've seen her on my channel a whole bunch. Okay, Mike continues. After Hubbard went on the lam, Annie Broker was with him in person every day. Miscavige received dispatches from Hubbard during this time, but sometimes it would be weeks or many months with no communication at all to anyone, other than the few people that were with him. The idea that he had more interaction with Hubbard than anyone is simply a blatant lie. Okay, the next claim about Miscavige. In later years, L. Ron Hubbard described a heroic church executive who identified and then cleared the ranks of rogue staff attempting to seize control of Scientology while Mr. Hubbard was engaged in intensive research and not directly involved in the day-to-day management of the church. Mike Rinder says, no, he didn't. He, meaning L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard did not single anyone out. He referred to Scientologists, not a single Scientologist. The actual quote is, and this is from L. Ron Hubbard, so forgive me for not managing the church when it almost fell into hostile hands. It all came out all right. Why? Because real Scientologists made sure it did. My faith was justified. Mike continues, Miscavige's PR flunkies just made up the idea that he singled out Miscavige as the Scientologist. He did no such thing. The next claim. In 1982, Mr. Hubbard requested a corporate reorganization of the church designed to ensure the church and the religion could move on into perpetuity, always remaining true to its source materials, which is the term for L. Ron Hubbard's philosophy, policies, and the fundamental theology of the religion. Thus, Mr. Hubbard established the Religious Technology Center to hold the Scientology and Dianetics trademarks and to preserve and maintain and protect the Scientology religion. He appointed Mr. Miscavige a trustee of that church organization. Mike explains, Hubbard did not appoint David Miscavige as the head or chairman of the board of RTC. Miscavige conducted a coup and took over RTC after Hubbard died because the then head of RTC, Vicky Asnaran, was loyal to Annie and Pat Broker. And Author Services International had become pretty much irrelevant in the overall scheme of things with Hubbard's death. They were now the organization representing a dead man, no longer his contact point with the outside world. If you doubt this, just look at how insignificant ASI is in the Scientology world today. So ASI is Author Services International, and they basically operate as L. Ron Hubbard's they call ASI his literary agency. And my understanding is that when L. Ron Hubbard was alive, the power that ASI had was that they represented L. Ron Hubbard, the author. They were almost considered, in some ways, senior to the entire Scientology operation because they represented L. Ron Hubbard, the man, the author. And yeah, ASI is totally irrelevant in Scientology today. Although they're considered very senior level Sea Org members, they really have absolutely nothing to do with the operation of Scientology at all. Okay, the next claim. Mr. Hubbard also appointed David Miscavige as the chairman of the organization charged with overseeing and handling his personal affairs for the remainder of his life. Mike says, well, that's sort of true. He was the boss of Author Services. ASI's primary function was to make money for Hubbard. When they weren't making enough selling books, they descended into complete ripoffs with wildly overpriced limited edition books and artwork. The other main role was to get an all clear for Hubbard so he could come out of hiding, something he never accomplished, which incurred the wrath of Hubbard for his failure. And finally, perhaps most importantly, actually, this is really interesting because I know a lot of, sort of speaking to the under the radar Scientologists out there. Miscavige touts his horn so much as being someone who has always carried out LRH's vision and wishes, and even all the changes he's made to Scientology itself. He makes these changes, claiming they were the real wishes of L. Ron Hubbard that had never been honored before his death. But I think it's worth putting a fine point on the fact that the main task Miscavige was given was to resolve all of the legal threats against L. Ron Hubbard so L. Ron Hubbard could come out of hiding and publicly resume personally and overtly taking control of Scientology. And in that most important trusted objective, Miscavige utterly failed. In fact, you could say Miscavige had no interest or incentive to accomplish that goal because L. Ron Hubbard coming back to overtly take control of Scientology would have removed Miscavige from the position of authority he had essentially risen to in the absence of L. Ron Hubbard. So that's something interesting to consider. All right, let's see. Where was I here? Okay. And finally, perhaps most importantly, in Hubbard's last days, when he was, according to Miscavige, preparing to causatively drop his body, he did not summon David Miscavige to his ranch in Creston to turn over his hat or even say goodbye. Ray Midoff was called, and he was in attendance those last few days, along with Pat and Annie Broker, Sarge Fouth, and his doctor, Gene Denk. How is it L. Ron Hubbard would not want to talk to the person in charge of handling his personal affairs and his most trusted associate? God, that is such a good point. Mike says, as I described in my book, and as Marty Rathbun covered in his book, Scientology loves to cite Marty Rathbun as an expert these days, Miscavige pulled off a coup and has since rewritten history to make it seem as though this is what Hubbard wanted. It was not. So, I mean, this isn't necessarily some big hard-hitting expose video. I mean, a lot of what we're talking about here has been talked about a lot of times over the years. I thought it deserved repeating because part of the mystique and the prestige that David Miscavige has in Scientology and the source of his power is this false story, this false narrative that has been fed to all the Scientologists. That Miscavige single-handedly running everything is exactly what L. Ron Hubbard wanted. And, when I was in Scientology, I probably wouldn't have believed any information I was exposed to that contradicted that. But I do still think it's worth repeating that message. And for you Scientologists who, I don't know, maybe if you have a few minutes to think about these things a little more deeply than you ever have before, I think the last thing that Mike Rinder said there is uniquely or particularly impactful. L. Ron Hubbard did know he was coming close to the end of his life. And he did summon some Scientology executives to come to where he was and provide assistance in some capacity. David Miscavige was not one of those people. I bet Scientology would never want you to know that. And speaking of Ray Midoff, Ray Midoff for the last, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years, however long it's been, certainly been more than 20, since 1986 or whatever, has held the most senior technical post that exists in Scientology, called the Senior Case Supervisor International. All you Scientologists out there know that Ray Midoff was one of those people who would speak at almost every international event 5 or 6 times a year, pretty much, at almost every event. Guys, where the hell is Ray Midoff? Why is it that you no longer see or hear from the most senior technical person in all of Scientology? Why is it that you don't even know if Ray Midoff is still Senior CS International? Why is it that if he is Senior CS International, you no longer hear from him? Why is it that if he's no longer Senior CS International, you don't know who is? Why is it that someone who was so trusted by L. Ron Hubbard, that he's one of the last people who was called to come to him before he died to assist, and he's disappeared? If you don't care that Mike Rinder has left, if you don't care that Debbie Cook has left, if you don't care, well, nobody knew who Marty Rathbun was before he left, but if you don't, if you don't care where Guillaume Lacerve is, or Mark Yeager, or Mark Ingber is someone you would see every now and then, or Greg Hughes, all these, or Heber Jensch, if you don't care why all these other executives have disappeared, don't you care about where Senior CS Int is? I mean, even if you're a public Scientologist who doesn't particularly care about senior management executives, you probably still care about the tech. Well, who's supposed to be responsible for Scientology's tech? I got news for you. It's not David Miscavige. David Miscavige, it's Ray Midoff, and yet he has disappeared. Anyway, I know a lot of this will largely just fall on deaf ears, because Scientologists, when you live in the bubble, you can explain away and justify almost anything. But I still think it still deserves to be repeated every now and then. So that those of you Scientologists who are starting to question and think about things, have some food for thought. Let's see. Jamie Dodger, before I wrap it up here, I'll just tackle the super chats. Ron the Lunatic. Yes, that was the one Ron Mag that didn't make the cut. Sherry N. First super chat question. How on Tigiak did David Miscavige okay a song called We Stand Tall? Yes, well, that's a really good point. We stand small. Jamie Dodger again. Was Hubbard and Miscavige dating? They didn't even know each other well enough to date. You know what I'm saying? Let me see. Fabian Andiel. What do you know about Church of Scientology in Austria? Do you know Sabine Weber? The name Sabine Weber does ring a bell. I don't know if that's just from social media. I definitely know that name. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, though, if that's a current Scientologist or a former Scientologist. And I'm almost positive there was an org in Austria, but I'd have to Google it to make sure. So I guess, Fabian, the real answer is I don't know much. I've been to Austria. I visited Vienna, one of the most beautiful cities I've ever been to. It was amazing. But I don't even remember when I was in Vienna. I don't even remember being like, ooh, I should walk by the org and see what it looks like. So honestly, I'm embarrassed to say I'm not even sure if there was an org there or not. So sorry, Fabian. Fabian again. Did you hear anything on Gottfried Helnwein, Austrian painter, artist, OT8, in your time in Scientology? Oh, is he the guy that does these big, really cool murals? Again, Fabian, if I did hear anything, it wasn't particularly interesting. I mean, as someone who grew up as a staff member and a Sea Org member, public and who was who, there just wasn't a lot of care or interest in all that. I mean, the public that we were most familiar with were the public who were the biggest donators, the biggest donors, or the biggest recruiters, like in Scientology, the public members who bring people into Scientology. When I say recruiters, I mean bringing people into Scientology, not bringing them like into the C organization. They're called field staff members and FSMs, and the most successful FSMs in the world would be awarded at the international events, and so we all knew who they were. But if there was some big famous painter in Scientology, the only reason that would even have been of interest to me is like, oh look, it's someone that once people find out they're a Scientologist, they're going to be interested in Scientology. So I can't say I really heard anything about Gottfried. Again, sorry, I don't know more about that. That's all I got on this subject. So much more to come today. In fact, I was even working on a whole other video, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to get that one done before an interview that I have scheduled with Gary Jackson Moorhead. So stay tuned for that, guys. I got at least 3 interviews I'm doing today. It's going to be a busy day. Thank you all for watching. Thanks to everyone who watches until the very end, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right